Welcome to the speaker series, everybody. My name is Sarah Gardam, and I am the outreach coordinator at Skagit Land Trust. I'm excited to welcome everybody here tonight. We have a very interesting topic. This is Anna Jordan. She is a funeral director at Kern's Funeral Home. So she is right next door to Skagit Land Trust office, which is really cool. When we were talking about this presentation, she was able to just walk next door and have a chat with us. So I wanted to start by remembering that the lands we're going to talk about tonight have been inhabited and stewarded by Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. Those were no doubt some of the first peoples to practice green burial and similarly sustainable practices. So we are grateful for their ongoing protection and stewardship of the lands and waters surrounding us. A little bit about Skagit Land Trust. We're an accredited nonprofit land trust started in 1992 by 3 founders and 32 charter members who saw the value of preserving the Skagit. They saw that it would be under a lot of pressure for development in the coming years. Our mission is to conserve wildlife habitat, wetlands, agricultural and forest lands, scenic open space, and shorelines for the benefit of our community and as a legacy for future generations. And our tagline is saving land for tomorrow. We have, up to date, we have helped to protect over 11,500 acres of land in Skagit County. We do this by purchasing and accepting donations of land and conservation easements, and by assisting partners and agencies with land conservation projects. And we have some very exciting ones coming up to announce in our February newsletter. So if you're not on our mailing list, you can go to our website, skagitlandtrust.org, and get signed up. I want to introduce Anna Jordan a little more formally. So Anna is an artist, a celebrant, a funeral director, a pre-planning specialist, and a board member of the National Home Funeral Alliance since 2023. Anna hails from Vermont, but has loved living in the Pacific Northwest since 2020. Her home is in Everett, but she has chosen to pursue her passion for death care at Kern Funeral Home because it's one of the few remaining family-owned funeral homes on the I-5 corridor. Anna is drawn to the natural world and the way the cycle of life, including death, is demonstrated. I love this, the way she wrote this, in the mossy, humus-rich PNW forests and rainforests and coastal lands. Preserving these wild places for the continued renewal of the biome is of the utmost importance to her. Doing so while healing our relationship with death and nature is the reason behind her efforts to promote conservation burial grounds in the region, including the Skagit Valley. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Anna.
So, yes, and thanks to Skagit Land Trust for having me here today. Very happy to be with you all. And there's a lot of information to cover, and I want to leave time for questions after the presentation. But if your questions don't get answered here, you can always call Kern Funeral Home and make an appointment so I can give you my undivided attention. And I love questions, so anytime. In my work as a funeral director and pre-planning specialist, I help people think ahead about how they want their funeral to go and how they would like their body laid to rest or committed, or the word comes up, disposition. It's a legal term that we use in the funeral industry. It comes from the Latin roots dis, which means apart, and ponere, which means to place. So to place apart, that's what disposition essentially means. And how would you answer this question for yourself? Where and how would you want your body to be placed apart? The apart part can be a jarring indication of the separation of death. To reconcile this separation, many may turn to beliefs that explain how the spirit lives on when the body dies, and some may not. But as stewards of our bodies, we have the responsibility or the opportunity to return our borrowed molecules back to the earth in as beneficial a way as possible. And this can be done. You can be a tree, and let me count the ways. Death happens to all of us. And it might feel like an emergency when it happens, but it need not always be. And that doesn't mean that it isn't traumatic. But sometimes it's peaceful, sometimes even beautiful. If long before the moment looms, you can allow yourself to become acquainted with and even get comfortable with death as a part of life, then you may be able to approach your own death with calm attention and less fear. Whether you are 16 or 89, if you can see death as a part of the cycle of life, understand that we have very little, if any, control over how and when it comes to us, and no one should be blamed for dying. And then consider what we do with our bodies is something we can control to some extent. And if you are ready to turn toward the specter of your own mortality and fight fear with information, and calmly think about it, and talk about it, and develop a plan for one of the only inevitabilities we all face, then you will have done yourself and your loved ones and the earth an invaluable service. We have choices. We have more choices these days than we did prior to the legalization of natural organic reduction here in Washington state in 2019. And what we now call green or natural burial was the practice prior to the introduction of embalming in the mid-1800s. Until the 20th century, funerals in the US were organized by family and neighbors and held at home. People were often buried on family property. But as communities became larger and more established, common cemeteries began to be used. And funeral homes were later established to relieve the family of logistical problems presented by death. In Vermont, where I come from, there are little burial grounds like the grave on the right, scattered throughout the landscape. Or on the left, sorry. On the right. On the left, you see cemeteries as we think of them today. So what changed? Embalming came about during the Civil War when soldiers who died in battle far from home were preserved so they could be transported home for burial and funeral services, where families were accustomed to being able to view the body before burial. Because embalming requires knowledge of anatomy and dangerous chemicals, it became a profession where before families and communities took care of the body from death to burial. Today, home funerals, though legal in most states, are rarely practiced, and instead, people rely on licensed professionals. Embalmed bodies filled with these chemicals are perceived as posing a danger to public health if buried directly in the ground without a sealed casket encased in a protective vault. The vault is often required by cemeteries now because they want to maintain their park-like setting. The vaults help keep the graves from sinking and settling, and that would make mowing difficult. In a natural burial, the ground above the body is mounded after burial and left to settle as the body decays and goes back to the earth. But this makes mowing difficult. In the early 1800s, the growth of cities and industrial centers left few places for trees and strolling on manicured paths besides a cemetery. And this is where the park-like cemetery idea took hold. One of the major issues facing traditional burials these days, especially in urban areas like Seattle, is the scarcity of land needed for park-like model, seen on the left. Seen below, you can see Boston's first public park, which was Forest Hills Cemetery. And ironically, some of the city parks we enjoy today were the result of planning for municipal cemeteries. You add to these ingredients the rise in manufacturing of metal caskets, and you have the funeral industry as we know it today. Yes, that is Abe Lincoln. He kind of popularized embalming after he passed. The funeral industry today. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that seeks to perpetuate the status quo. This from the National Funeral Directors Association. Funeral homes generate a total of $16.3 billion in the US, while crematories and cemeteries generate just over $4 billion in revenue. And from the consumer's perspective, Americans spent over $35 billion on funeral and burial services in 2022. Enter cremation, which took hold after the creation of 2 crematories in the US by the end of the 1800s. Flame-based cremation is the disposition choice that has risen to over 60% of Americans choosing it over burial at 31% in 2025. Flame-based cremation is one of 3 forms of reduction, which include water-based cremation and natural organic reduction. What are the reasons you might choose reduction over burial? Many families are scattered throughout the country and don't die close to their point of origin where they might have cemetery property. Being cremated makes it easier and less expensive to get to the final resting place. And your loved ones may not know what to do with you, and you may not have thought to talk to them about it. When people are caught off guard by death, which is often the case, cremation is often the easiest option. What many people don't know is we have another cremation option in Washington state called alkaline hydrolysis, or water-based cremation, or aquamation. Aquamation is not a new technology. It has been used for large and small animals for decades and only recently became an option for humans. There are separate facilities for humans, and unfortunately, there are only a couple in our state. It takes an investment both in time and financial to start one. And this water-based reduction process involves placing the body in a pressurized tank with 98% water and 5% alkaline chemicals, preferably potassium hydroxide. Sodium hydroxide is harmful to plants. The process takes an hour or 2 and results in effluent, that's the liquid, that it's sterile. That effluent includes water, salt, sugars, amino acids, and peptides. And what's left in the tank is bone, calcium phosphate, which is then processed like the bones from flame-based cremation, so there are no recognizable particles. It's basically ash. Natural organic reduction, or human composting, or terramation, first became legal in this state in 2019. Katrina Spade designed a contained system to mimic the natural process of decomposition, turning bodies into composted soil as a way to solve the problem of land scarcity in urban centers, and as a way for people to go back to the earth without having to buy cemetery property. Since then, there are now 14 states, I believe, where natural organic reduction is legal. I'll refer to it as NOR, N-O-R, from now on. But there are only facilities in 4 of those states. We have a few of them here in Washington. Each facility has pretty much developed their own method for natural organic reduction. With this new method of disposition, I just want to point out that people are reimagining new forms of ceremony, some of which are encouraging more family involvement, and I really like to see that. So here's the process of natural organic reduction. It involves placing the body in a contained vessel with organic matter, usually sawdust, alfalfa, and straw. And did you know our bodies already have the microbes that will eat us when we die? There's no need to add anything else to the natural organic process, only to provide air and monitor the temperature within the vessels. 3 to 5 months later, the result is a completely broken down body in a homogeneous cubic yard of soil. Like I said, there's a lot of information here, so I'm going to pause a little on this slide. Okay, now that you've been reduced, how could you be a tree? The important thing to know is before you scatter, plant, or pour your ashes at the foot of a tree, amending with less nutrient-rich soil is important to keep the plants from being overburdened. Just like you would do when applying compost or fertilizer to your garden. Ashes from flame-based cremation are highly alkaline. A lot of people don't know that. And they won't encourage plant growth until neutralized, and that can take time. There are some proprietary blends that you can add to flame-based cremation ashes, but they take up to 120 days before they have neutralized the ashes. Water-based ashes and terramains, which is the terramated natural organic reduction remains, they only need to be amended and then placed. But where? Is location important? I think it is to many people. This organization, called A Better Place Forest, offers a tree instead of a tombstone when you place your loved one's ashes in one of the lands that they own. It's a nice idea. They purchase lands based on a criteria of conservation value. And they have an initiative partnering with conservation organizations to preserve forests, protect biodiversity, and promote stewardship. But it's not available near here yet. And they don't do burial. For many people, the where is important. Do you want to be laid to rest or scattered or returned to specific places that are dear to you and to your loved ones? We need more options locally, and as I'm about to demonstrate, green or natural burial is the simplest, most direct, natural way to return our borrowed molecules to the earth. And the only technology you need is provided by Mother Earth herself. So last year, a client came to me saying she wanted to be a tree, but didn't want to have to go far. And she didn't want to be cremated. So began my search. This map is from the Green Burial Council, and it was a good start, but I have added to it. It includes cemeteries that offer hybrid burial, and that's all of the blue marks you see here. Hybrid burial means they will lay your body on the ground close to 6 feet down and then cover you with a concrete liner placed upside down. Often there's no tree planting involved, and it's still in a manicured cemetery. And then we have a cremation garden at Mount Vernon Cemetery, where you can put cremated remains, either scattered or in an urn, and then plant a tree or some other shrub. And it's got a beautiful view. There's also Sunnyside Cemetery, which just added a green burial section. And some of you may know about the Meadow, which I think was our first green burial ground here in Washington State, thanks to Brian Flowers. And down here, the Great River Natural Burial is actually in Oregon. But I just want to point out the purple. We have White Eagle Memorial Preserve all the way down here, almost in Oregon, and the Herland Forest, also very far from us. And when I was looking for conservation burial opportunities, the closest was way up here on Salt Spring Island. Their natural burial cemetery is the closest thing I could find that would match our particular Pacific Northwest rainforest environment. And so I'm really glad that they're doing that, and they shared a lot of helpful information with me about how to do it right. Here's a picture of the meadow up there in Ferndale. My client, by the way, chose the Coopville Sunnyside Cemetery for green burial. Ferndale seemed too far for some reason. Ferndale's meadow was, as I said, the first Washington State green burial site. And some may say it's a rather awkward placement on an empty lot between a conventional manicured cemetery and a subdivision. Similarly, Sunnyside Cemetery in Coopville has recently, like I said, opened a green burial section. And also I'll mention the cremation garden at Sunset Corner at Mount Vernon Cemetery, which is pretty new as well. And if you ever get a chance to visit, the views are amazing. Mount Baker to one side and the Skagit River to the other side. So here is the rule for green burial. You can see how it differs from what is called conventional or traditional burial. An unembalmed body is placed in a shroud or a natural biodegradable casket and buried in the first 3.5 feet of soil where the microbial community will be most active. And then a tree or any other natural vegetation that can be planted is fed by your body's nutrients. The graves, as I said, are mounded, and the soil placed or displaced by the body is mounded on top and will settle as the body becomes soil. But what if we don't want to take up valuable land resources with burial? And what of the expense of these plots? What if you could be buried and preserve the natural beauty of a thriving, living landscape? And if what we really want is to conserve the wild places and return our bodies to the earth in such a way so trees can benefit from our body's nutrients, as the earth in all her wisdom processes our remains in her natural timing. And if you want to actually be given back to the earth as we here in the Pacific Northwest experience it, as a densely populated rainforest with moss-covered trees, fern-blanketed, fungi-infested, rich humus ground. And our coastal forests are the epitome of the cycle of life being played out before our eyes, with great giant trees, a biome in themselves, falling eventually and becoming nursing logs for new trees to spring from. Then, conservation burial is what I'm talking about. Conservation burial is a practice where land is conserved and used for burial. The vision is that by responsibly stewarding our bodies in death, we can actually contribute to the health of the ecosystems we love, and not just try to mitigate the harm, choosing the lesser of several evils when it comes to our disposition choices. This idea is near and dear to my heart because I think it will help heal our society's relationship to our earth and our relationship with death as a part of life. Let's let the trees be our teachers. Most of these images you see are from Salt Spring Natural Burial Ground. I spoke with them, and I spoke with Herland Forest Cemetery and Jody over at White Eagle Natural Burial Preserve when it comes to how do you do this differently than the conventional cemetery? The lots are larger, for one thing, than a conventional cemetery. They're 20 feet by 20 feet at White Eagle. And they're dictated by the existing growth patterns of the trees. At White Eagle, you can be buried near a tree, but if they have to cut through a root larger in circumference than the grave digger's wrist, then they will dig elsewhere. They have choices in a 20-foot by 20-foot lot. Or the arborist at Salt Spring states that a small slice of the tree's root system can be disturbed to make the grave, and that the overall benefit to the tree far outweighs the harm of cutting through a few roots. And you see, these graves are not huge. They're about body sized, right? They don't go down more than 3.5 feet. I also want to mention that the scent barrier for any kind of animal is 18 inches. And when you're buried at 3.5 feet down, that usually means you've got at least 2 feet of soil above you. So that should never be an issue. Green burial practices are adhered to in conservation burial as well. So the body can be decomposed in nature's timing to benefit all of the surrounding life. So, how can we make this happen here in Skagit County is my question. And I've been working on a project that is actually in Mason County, again, far from here. And I've been learning a lot through the process. So I think I'll just leave that for questions. But I'll just say what I found is there are 2 ways to do it. And you would have seen in the conservation burial slide with that tree with the bubbles around it that working with a conservation trust and creating a conservation easement on what's already a cemetery is a double protection. Cemeteries themselves can have, well, first of all, cannot be developed, right? Because it's a burial ground. Also, you can write conservation into the bylaws of the cemetery as well. So it's just something to consider. And this is one of the reasons I walked across the parking lot to talk to Skagit Land Trust, because it's just been an idea that I'm sure there's a solution to. So I'm going to go, this final slide is assessment of the carbon footprint of each of those alternative disposition options. It doesn't include the conventional burial because there's really no point in putting it here in terms of carbon footprint. And now I think I'll take questions.
Thank you so much, Anna. I will give people a minute to plug their questions into the chat. In the meantime, I have a question for you. How do you think that cultural attitudes towards death are influencing the way we handle burial today? So it sounds like there's been a shift towards cremation. How do you see that shifting culturally? Like, is that reflecting
It's
some?
yeah, definitely. I'm getting more people saying they want to be a tree, and they say it that way too. So then I'm like, whoa, there's a lot of different ways to get there. And I reserve judgment because everyone has a different set of circumstances. I also am very aware that when death occurs, people go on autopilot, and what even if they had high ideals about, oh, I want it to be, natural organic reduction, I want it to be composted or anything like that, there's all this societal stuff that will come in and shift them back to the tradition. When you're on autopilot, you are going to do what was done in your family before. So it's a very slow change. But I love that people are open to thinking about it, because thinking about it ahead of time, talking about it ahead of time, will solidify whatever your value is around what you do with your body.
Thank you. I'm seeing some questions from others popping into the chat. So
Okay.
some of these are, really some questions directed to the land trust staff. So I might wait on those and get some of the
Yeah.
more general ones first. So Stephanie asks, so can we use soil from NOR in natural areas? What are the options, limitations for use of that soil?
Well, I'll start, and I think you can probably answer some of that too because it's something that is happening. Um, I have heard, well, because in natural areas, you can't hide a cubic yard of soil, right? And you wouldn't normally add soil to a natural area. Um, in other practices, I know they have done things like if they're sort of like rehabilitating a green belt or an area that needs to be restored in some way to its natural uh, state, they will remove the topsoil, place the terra remains, and then replace the topsoil on top of that. Those terra remains are very nutrient rich. They're compost, right? So that's the amendment that I was talking about is that either you do it that way or both, you mix with soil that's already in place there and then place it around a tree where that those nutrients can do the most good if you're planting trees, but that means that you're altering an environment that already exists. So I think that's where I would say, hey Sarah, how are you guys dealing with that?
Mhm. Yeah, well, Skagit Land Trust currently has a contract with a company called Recompose, and we receive some compost that includes that has been produced through a composting process with human beings who opted when they died for their body to go towards conservation. And then that compost, which each person is mixed with other materials, and it ends up being several cubic yards of compost. And that gets sent to a number of conservation organizations that have contracted with Recompose. So we don't necessarily know who we get, and the people that donate their bodies don't know where they go specifically, but they know that their bodies get used for conservation. Um, I see some more questions coming in. Uh, Ian comments that San Juan Preservation Trust owns a graveyard on Vendovi Island. Could that legal status be used somehow? I didn't know that, so I will look into it and get back to Ian on that one. That's a good question. Um,
I'm writing it down.
yeah, you're not familiar with that project or that.
No,
Okay.
I did hear, I don't know if I heard that from you, that the Jefferson Land Trust is working on, they have a conservation initiative, but they have experienced some pushback from communities
Hmm.
in the area, so they haven't got anything actually active as far as I know right now.
Could you speak a little bit to the resistance that people are running into? Because I don't think everyone has a clear sense of what the issues are. I think a lot of us who have a green orientation are like, oh, what's the big
What's the
deal?
problem? Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, well, green orientation, but also, like I said, me coming from Vermont, where you walking through the forest and stumble over a cemetery, it's it seems pretty natural to me to have cemeteries close by. So I think the main concerns are the scent, which is why I mentioned the scent barrier. They're worried that yeah, they're going to smell something. And the other thing is groundwater concerns. And when in the project I was working on in Mason County, and we haven't gotten to the special use permit yet, by the way, but I've been getting all the things in order for that. You basically, the same as you would for any zoning project, you have to make sure that you are a certain number of feet away from any water source. And so you've got to know your neighbor's water sources and things like that. The ground, our earth is a really good filter. It's the best filter, So that's why they put those parameters in place because they know that by the time any liquid gets to a water source, it's going to be as clean as anything else. So that is just something that is, again, it's like fighting fear with information. So the other fear, I guess, that people have is that it will affect property value. And I suppose that has to do with, as you said, the culture in that community, considering, it is even with the park-like cemeteries, it actually is a benefit to have a place close to home to go walk and have trees and paved paths and things like that, potentially views. So
Mhm.
that those are the only ones that I have encountered and heard about, and I'm sure there are others, but I'd be happy to answer any reservations people had.
Thank you. I've got another question for you. Sue mentions, I think I heard that Jefferson Land Trust has a green burial site in that county. Is that correct? And if so, is that a possible model for the Skagit? I think you've maybe already answered this, that there is a green burial site at Jefferson Land Trust and that you would like to see that happening in the Skagit. But do you have anything to add for that one?
Actually, I don't know specifically about Jefferson County's green burial unless the Coopville's on Whidbey Island, so that's not Jefferson County. That's the one I was talking about. And again, like, the green burial sites are wonderful, and it's a really good thing to see these things multiply and become more. But like I said, green burial is like one step toward what I'm talking about, which is the conservation burial. But it's a good step. So I would love to see, and that's the problem is like here in Skagit, actually, except for Ferndale and Coopville, I was unable to find green burial anywhere between Ferndale and, well, I mean, all the way down to Herland. So, I mean, that's a travesty. It's got to change. Yeah.
Okay, I've got another question from Ian. He said, my first choice would be to have my body put in one of my many large compost piles. I guess that would get my family or friends in trouble. So, what's the cheapest way to get my bodily remains into a form that wouldn't get them in trouble to do that?
Are you
Do you have
talking? So, if you're talking about specifically, let me try to answer that question in kind of a roundabout way. When I went to talk to Walt down at Herland Natural Forest, he was one of the first people doing composting, but they were doing it in the ground. The soil down there is very clayey, and um, they all with like consultation with the state in terms of legality and what they were doing. They were developing a way of burying people in the ground where they were actually being composted. So what they do with their burial plots is when someone chooses a place to be buried in the forest, they start to dig the grave by running water, like it's a kind of pressured water on the ground to soften the ground. They pull the dirt out. They add wood chips and they let it sit until the person needs it. And then they place the body in the ground and essentially, and cover it. And essentially it is buried, but also being composted, which is kind of just natural burial. It's just the way that they have the way the soil is over there. That's sort of more what happens. There is above ground burial or composting there as well, and it is outdoors. It's the only place I think that I know of that's doing it outdoors. Um, if you want to, so Martha Stewart, I think, also said she was just going to be composted on her land, like her horses. But until that particular process, see, it was legalized here in contained environments and contained vessels. And every state is trying, I think in New York, composting is, well, I shouldn't speak actually. New York has awfully strange rules about it, but they were trying to develop ways to do composting outside in New York State. Um, yeah, it's complicated.
Well, thank you for that. And there's a so I guess just to maybe focus on the financial question a little bit, how do the costs of green burial compare with traditional options?
So it is less expensive because you don't have to pay for a expensive casket. You can make your own casket. You could be buried in a shroud, which can be a sheet. You don't have to be embalmed, or you can't be embalmed for green burial. Usually that is a cost that can range from, I don't know, 500 to 1,000, close to 1,000. And if the funeral home, our funeral home doesn't charge for refrigeration, but some funeral homes do charge for refrigeration. Green burial, usually you want to have that done as soon as possible. So then it just comes down to the cost of the grave, right? And the cost at the cemetery. And I will say it's kind of like, shopping at your favorite organic food store. The costs are not going to be the cheapest, but when you take out those other expenses, it generally is less expensive than conventional burial.
Mm.
So that's my answer about green burial. I know that human composting is also one of those things. The thing with green burial and human composting and cremation, any of those reduction, they there shouldn't be anything in addition. So like human composting, you pay the amount, I think it's 5,500 at return home, and that's it. It's like,
Mhm.
and then you can either, pick up the cubic yard of terminated remains, or you can have them put it in their conservation program, and that's it. So it does simplify in some ways, and that can be a cost-effective choice.
Thank you. And yeah, I would encourage folks who are interested in human composting. There are quite a few companies doing this. I'm not sure how many right around here, but it's worth contacting those companies directly with questions about costs. Um, I am wondering about. Oops.
Should I stop sharing so we can see
Yeah,
people?
yeah, that's great. Thanks. There was a lot of detail on that last slide, so
Yes, it's a little distracting.
people had time to study it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Um, the thing that I see happen a lot with people is that you know, they they don't think about it ahead of time. They come to the funeral home when they need it and they're in distress, right? And the worst part of my job as a funeral director is to show the bill and then say, and here are the cemetery costs as well.
Mhm.
So it can be almost double. And that is a shock to people. So I think I'm just going to go back to the idea of like really thinking about it and looking at your options, and also like we as a community, as a society, need to provide more of those options. Like you shouldn't have to go all the way to Ferndale for green burial, and you shouldn't have to um yeah go, let's see, Coopville. Yeah, it shouldn't be that hard to find
Well, I
those
see
options.
some potentially good news from Tom in the chat who says, we are working on establishing a conservation burial area on Orcas Island. One of our special
Yay.
issues, yeah, one of our special issues is people who want to be buried here don't always get to be here or don't always die here. They often die in hospitals on the mainland, like in Skagit County. And we'd love to speak with you about burial logistics.
Oh, that's
Wonderful.
wonderful. Yes, Tom, please get in contact with me because I have people that I'm actually helping with their plan that have bought plots on Orcas Island. They've got their stones and stuff, but they did want to have that option and it just wasn't available. So yes, I mean, one of the reasons of me being here is to get the conversation going, and I figure people who are attending a land trust, you know, talk series are of the same mind and thinking about it themselves and maybe have some connections. So that's wonderful. This is a problem we can solve. Absolutely.
Somebody asked, Kaylani asked, is it legal to bury a body on your own private land? I think you might have
Just
answered.
recently, Washington passed the law that yes, it is. There are parameters and rules. Um, and I need to do more research on that. I just found that out more recently because it's a brand new law and isn't advertised, let's just say.
Hmm. So that could be an answer for Ian's question too, if it is legal. So that is breaking news, it sounds like. Okay, there's a question about SLT and Currents partnering. I'm going to get to that. First, I wanted to ask Anna Stephanie's question. Can you tell us more about the options for the soil after terramation?
You know, I would like to. I think it has to be something that is brought up to the terramated or the natural organic reduction facilities, and I have to say honestly, partly because of their messaging around what they're doing, they're a little reluctant to kind of take it apart and say, well, can we make this better? Like, can we do this in a more beneficial way for how we're framing this, right? Like was brought up before, you're not going to throw that much compost into a natural environment and not affect things detrimentally, you know? So okay, so let's think about it here. Here we are together thinking about, like, for instance, Skagit Land Trust, you guys use that compost to reforest in certain areas, right? So you're planting trees using that compost, and that's a very appropriate use of that. And I have seen, I think there's a story on Recompose's site of a woman whose husband died and he really loved Japanese maples. So what she did with his soil is put uh, potted a bunch of Japanese maples and gave them out to his friends. So they're planting trees in his honor. And that's a beautiful, beautiful story. Absolutely. But it doesn't always really mesh with actual like conservation of natural environments. And that's kind of the thing that we're sort of lifting the lid on. So it's a good question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Uh, Another person commented that Linda commented her choice is to have the compost from her body be placed around her garden, as she has used compost yearly for 20 years, and her property will be inherited by close friends who would love for her compost to be part of her garden. So she wonders if that seems doable. And I think that would be a question for whichever company she would work with on human composting and
Yeah, and
whether.
currently the guidelines are don't use it on food in food gardens.
Mhm.
But I tend to think that is a lot more about people's sensitivities than science. You know,
Mhm.
there's no DNA left.
Yeah.
Uh, and they're proving that with research. I'll be attending the TerraCon in February, and any of you here who are interested, and these questions are really good questions to bring to the TerraCon, which is hosted by Return Home February 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in Tacoma. So little plug for that. But they are really seriously trying to find solutions to all these kinds of questions. So it's really helpful to get into a room. They do have a virtual option as well, but it's really, you know, since it's here in Washington, I've been there. This is the third one, and I'm going for the third time. So, yeah.
Thank you. Um, we had a question about SLT and Kern's partnering to establish a conservation burial site in Skagit County. Seems like a no-brainer and so needed. Thank you for that question. And you know, our mission at Skagit Land Trust is on conserving habitat, you know, and we often focus a lot on wildlife. and as well as, places for humans to enjoy. Usually we've focused on living humans, I guess, but um, we have to kind of stay close to our mission. And I think that question is a big one and then that would go towards, the board and our leadership team in terms of whether that aligns with our mission or not. So it's a really interesting question. And I think those conversations are going to be going on more and more. So thank you for the question. I mean, currently at our conservation areas, we practice leave no trace uh, principles most of the time for our conservation areas. So that would even include like we don't leave cremated ashes on our properties. I mean, we couldn't as officially accept those on our properties and still be in alignment with leave no trace policy, right? So that doesn't mean that it'll always be that way or something, but it's just kind of explaining where we are right now with how we've approached conservation areas. We have a whole conservation strategy and yeah, it's a little bit of a big topic. Molly, our executive director, actually just chipped into the chat and said Skagit Land Trust uses the compost for habitat restoration and other things. And she observed not all land that comes to us is in good shape. Yeah, very true.
Right. Because conservation kind of can be an umbrella for also rehabilitation, right?
Mhm. Right.
And just to say,
Uh,
yes, I understand the leave no trace principles, but I think
mhm,
that also kind of indicates our separation from nature. Like
mhm.
we as humans don't know how to interact with nature in a harmonious way, as though we are a part of it, which we are. So learning how to do that is what I'm talking about.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I'm really excited that it's coming up. Um, and we'll definitely be sharing all of this feedback that we're getting here. So,
Great.
any other questions? I certainly have a couple more, but I don't want to miss anybody in the chat. I think I've gotten everyone so far. Um, Maybe I'll ask you this, and I think you've already kind of answered it, but if there's anything you want to add about how families can start planning for the greenest burial they can get based on where they live. Like what are good steps for people to take to kind of get
Well, here,
ready?
the whole reason I'm here today talking to you, going back about 10 years, my 15-year-old daughter asked my 45-year-old self, Mom, where do you want to be buried? So it was like the first time I'd ever thought about that, that separation, that separation of death, and then like, okay, so then what happens after that, and how do the people you care about relate to you after that? So um if you're a body and you're buried in a particular place, you kind of hope that people will come visit you, right? I
Mhm.
thought Hawaii, they'd come see me in Hawaii. Um, but then you think about, well, there are a million places that I've been. Like I've lived in Alaska, I've lived in Vermont, I've lived in some beautiful places. This is my place of choice. Um, do I want to choose one? Not necessarily. Do I want to be scattered to the wind? Do I want to be thrown in the water? Maybe all of it, maybe I want my kids to be able to keep a part of me. And so that brings up the reduction thing. So, um, and if you wanted to save your family some funds, if you start now saving for the cost of your funeral and specifically your disposition, um, it opens up a lot of possibilities. So if you don't, then it'll fall to whatever the cheapest option is, and that would be cremation. So it's like there's a lot of moving parts in it, but that's why it's like good to think about it before you need it and ask your family what their preference is too.
Thank you. I see a good question here from Stephanie. Can you talk about some of the ritual that you have facilitated as part of green burial? And I also wanted to observe that, cremation, I think a lot of people, as you said, like a majority of people are opting for that, but that is different than having a place to visit where you know the
Well,
person
even
you
people who
went
are
to.
choosing, I'll get to
Yeah.
answering that, but even people who are
Mhm.
choosing cremation or have chosen cremation and forgot that they were holding grandma's ashes in the garage suddenly realize I would feel better if they were placed somewhere, like, so it is kind of a thing where as a culture we've kind of been like, well, wait, something's missing here, so site specific location is kind of important in a way. So again, the question, remind me what the question was.
Oh, she wanted to know about some of the rituals that you facilitated
Oh,
as part of
yeah.
green burial.
Well, green burial is again is like natural organic reduction is sort of very welcoming to more family involvement because you're not treating the body as a biohazard, say for instance, and it's a very natural process where in a home funeral you can keep the person. It's not an emergency when somebody dies at home. You don't have to call a funeral director right away. Even at our funeral home, we would call that delayed transfer. If you needed 24 hours or more than that, we would coach you through how to keep the body cool and how to make sure that, if you wanted to have the features set so that the mouth is closed and the eyes are closed and they're just resting peacefully, there are ways to do that that don't involve invasive um, procedures. So having a home vigil, visitation, viewing, transporting the body directly from the home to the cemetery. And families can do that in this state. Um, the cemetery's policies will be a limiting factor on that. But most cemeteries that offer green burial, the two that I can think of right now, are friendly to that. Like you know, I do believe. Uh, would accept a body from a family. I know that Return Home, Natural Organic Reduction in Auburn, will receive bodies from families. This is the kind of thing that, if you want to be a family directed home funeral family or community, talk to the funeral home, talk to the cemetery, and make sure that those policies are not going to limit you and what you want to do. And then, of course, when it comes to green burial, families get involved in digging the grave. They can. That's my vision for conservation burial. We're not bringing in heavy equipment. We're getting as many strong backs as we can to come with shovels and digging that 3.5 foot deep grave. And we're doing it on such a scale that we can stop if we feel like we're harming the roots of a tree and change direction, go to a different spot. That human scale, whether it's in ritual or the actual logistics of burying a body, is the thing that makes us realize we have lost a lot of ritual by giving it out to professionals or, mechanizing or automating any of that. Death is it's a threshold. It's an opportunity to learn about what it is to be alive.
Yeah, thank you. I have a another question that's a little more general. How can talking about death more openly support healthier communities? I mean, I think you've already illustrated this somewhat, but I just wondered if you had any more general thoughts because I know you're really an advocate for this cause, and so it goes beyond your profession. It gets
Mhm.
to seeing death being treated in a healthy way and being part of life rather than sort of hidden away or something that we stay in denial about our whole lives until suddenly
Right.
it hits us.
Yeah. I think there are a couple of different aspects in our culture that are barriers to that. So like one of them being the fear, right? And the fear begets ignorance, which begets fear, which begets ignorance. So it's a very, I see something that people are afraid of or that I'm afraid of. I mean, yeah, I was afraid of death. So I decided, well, I'm going to buddy up to it and get really comfortable with the concept, right? That's who I am. I know everybody isn't that way, and that's okay. The other thing that I think we do in our culture is, and I made note of this in my notes. I don't know if anyone caught that. Don't blame anyone for dying. Okay, that's one of the things that we all, when we see someone close to us or someone who we're just associated with, or somebody dies, and we look for what wrong decisions did they make. I'm not making those decisions. I'm not going to die. It's like our brain is doing that. So, and when I hold death cafes or death talks in the community, I get all ages, and I get people who are like walking through the cafe and here we're talking and want to know more, so they join in. And there's always this feeling of relief to find a safe place to talk about anything along, whether it's the story of, one of their parents dying and how they had to deal with that, or their own personal fears or feelings about death. It's one of those things that, yeah, it's so taboo to open conversations. It's become like a really, I think, beneficial. And I don't know. I don't know if there are more things about it. I'm sure there are that will help our society get more comfortable and more healthy around it. Yeah, the death cafes in Anacortes. I saw that note. Yeah, I went to one of those. Huge. Like it's nice
Yeah.
to have smaller groups too. Like sometimes. Yeah, it's great though that that's happening.
I went to one of those as well. Like I went a few times to that one and it was very crowded. At that time it was in that little community space building. I can't remember what it's called right now, like the cottage or something. And yeah, it was very crowded. I was like, "Ooh, I'm gonna need to find a smaller one."
Yeah, I saw this question about bones come up. I was wondering
Mhm.
if someone would ask that question because I have another kind of bone to pick. um,
Uh,
with all those forms of reduction, you have to. It's a state law, and that's why they used kind of, and a lot of the states are doing this that are legalizing natural organic reduction are kind of taking the cremation laws that they came up with decades ago and stamping them onto the natural organic reduction composting. And the reason I know in Washington, the reason why you have to reduce the bones down to an unrecognizable size is so that when people are scattering, they don't have to, and their scattered cremated remains are found, they don't have to call in the state anthropologist. There's only one in our state to identify the remains. So it's a logistical issue. But in other places, they have things called ossuaries that I would love to see happen in the United States. As far as I looked and I looked and I looked and I could not find what an actual ossuary where fully, full bones are able to be kept safe. So that's an issue for. I feel sensitive about that idea of my bones being run through a cremulator. That doesn't appeal to me. And as far as I can tell, I couldn't see just looking at Recompose's website, but I think all of the natural organic reduction facilities have to do some kind of thing to the bones to break them apart so that the bacteria and the microbes can get in there and do their thing. So that hurts, like hurts physically. I'd love to
yeah.
see it change. So
Yeah. Just going back through the questions here, somebody said, I think that was meant to be SLT. SLT says no. This is a question from Deb and Dan. SLT says no cremation ashes on their land. So is the kind accepted only when you have been composted first? And yes, currently we are taking compost from this company called Recompose. And that is, we are focused on habitat restoration. And so we would be using compost anyway to make sure that the seedlings that we're planting can succeed. So that is why that's sort of an exception to leave no traces because it's part of restoration work, as Molly mentioned. Um, Not all the lands we get are pristine when we get them. And so, um, yeah, so that is correct. Um, I see a question from Kaylani. There's no legal way to keep one or two bones.
I have an answer to that, I think. So I have heard, and there are actual religious practices that include choosing bones after cremation process to keep. And I think if you are part of one of those religious groups, you may be able to do that in this state. Or if you make a strong argument to your crematory operator, it could be a possibility. I don't know for sure. I'm not a complete expert. There is so much to know. So I hope I'm being accurate in my answers.
Thank you. You know a lot more than most of us do on the call. It really feels like a new topic to me, but it sounds like you've been having these conversations for quite a long time. It's just newer in my consciousness. Somebody asked about where Recompose is. I believe they're based in Seattle.
I think Idaho Street. Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's see. Are there any other questions? I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. But yeah, I wanted to comment that yeah, Kaylani asked about recommended resources for learning more. I have a few that one of our staff sent to me that they thought would be good to share. So after this, as we're getting the recording ready to send out to everybody, we'll collect those resources. I will review them. I've already read some of them and they're very interesting. One is on the science of all of these options, and I think it's mostly focusing on green burial and conservation burial. But there's two or three resources that I found. And Anna, if you have anything that you want me to bundle in to send people,
Yeah, I will. I will send you a list of resources. But I also want to say, like I said at the beginning, if you have questions that don't get answered here that come up later, you know where to find me at Kern Funeral Home, but call and schedule something because we never know what each day is going to bring over there. So
Mhm.
good to have things on the calendar.
And somebody asked about or said that they were looking forward to being able to watch this talk on a bigger screen to better see the presentation. And if you want to share that with everybody too, I
Yeah.
can email that. I'll
Yeah,
ask you
yeah,
later.
absolutely. Share this, yeah, share the slideshow because you're right. I mean, I took it down from like 2 dozen slides and I condensed a lot of information. And so, yeah, I know it's a lot. So it's a good resource though.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, here's another question. How is effluent disposed of after water-based cremation? From Tracy
Okay,
Bear.
so that's a good question. There are at the time that I was studying about alkaline hydrolysis, there was one facility in this state, and it was down in Kent. And I went and talked to the guy who put it together, and he's no longer involved. But at the time, I don't think he is Steve Webster. But so effluent generally goes into the wastewater system. It's sterile, and some say it actually helps clean our water, right? It's a little bit of a jump for people to think about, it's basically like the broken down soft tissue of their person going into the wastewater. But when you think about the water cycle, it's all everything is all part of the same cycle. I think it's actually a very beautiful thing. But also, the reason I mentioned that particular facility is that he was completely open to people taking the effluent, like they can collect it, 5-gallon buckets, and bring it home and use it as fertilizer for their plants because it is very nutrient rich for their plants. So
Stephanie commented, are you familiar with Brian Flowers? And I think you did mention him earlier. He has
Yeah.
the Green Burial site in Ferndale.
Well, he has his own funeral home now, and the Green Burial site, he was one of the founding members of the Green Burial Council. And I started my life as a funeral director up in Bellingham, actually, and so he was one of my mentors. Really wonderful guy, and he's got his own funeral home now called Wildflowers Funeral Concepts up in Ferndale again. And yeah, very he was key to creating the meadows there when he was working for Moles. And I know he has left Moles, he started his own thing. And so I can't really speak to how that cemetery is being managed without him. But I'm hoping that it's still being adhered to, green burial.
Well, thank you so much, Anna. This has been a really stimulating question and answer session. People asked great questions all over the place, and you handled them really in a very educational way. And I'm coming away from this understanding the topic at least a little bit better than I did before, and I think even a lot better. Um, I am
Great.
going to share my screen again real quick. And I wanted to talk about just some upcoming events that we have. If you like this talk, there's another one coming up on February 11th with Martha Jordan, not Anna Jordan, but Martha Jordan, who is a local expert on trumpeter swans, among other things. She's a wildlife biologist, and she's going to be talking about Washington's white birds of winter. So that's mostly swans and snow geese. Um, we have a bunch of swan viewing events in throughout the month of February, and if you go to our website, skagitlandtrust.org, you can see, I think that's the top news story on the page there, and there's a schedule once you click on that. So they are filling up pretty fast, but I think there are still a few spots. We also have a nature luminary making workshop next week over at Trinity Arts in Mount Vernon, but that is currently full. There is a wait list, so you're welcome to get on that. I would encourage folks to follow us on Eventbrite, and I will put those links in the chat along with like our socials and stuff like that, so that you can get connected to us if you're not already. We do have volunteer opportunities, including opportunities on the land, such as work parties. I think it's Monday, MLK Day. We're having two work parties, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, with a nature walk for volunteers in between. That information is on our website. And there's another work party at the March Point Heronry, which is one of our few properties that isn't typically open to the public. So this is kind of a sort of rare opportunity to get to visit it. So more information on that is on our website. Thank you again for joining us. Special thanks to Anna, to our members, to volunteers, partners, landowners. You're all such a big part of what we do. And if you want to learn more about becoming a member, becoming a volunteer, please visit our website. There's a page there, get involved, or if you want to make a donation, there's all that information is on our website. So again, just thank you, Anna. This was really cool. And the recording will be going around next week probably. So stay
Great.
tuned for that, and we'll gather up a few resources to send with it.
Yeah, I'll send you my resources too. Thank you. It's been a wonderful, wonderful opportunity and great questions. Love them. Yeah.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for the feedback and ideas, and we'll share that with our team over here. And who knows what the future may hold for conservation in Skagit County. So, or conservation burial in Skagit County. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.